kindness is guiding people to help them achieve what they're after. In the spirit of your question, the way that you can take action on it is by going out into the world, making a commitment every day to do a gesture where somebody knows you care about them. As long as people know that there are good humans out there, they can tolerate the bad ones. But the problem is, we can't be passive. When somebody's getting a hard time or struggling, we can't be passive and just let it happen. We have to realize we're all in it together.
Welcome to the Education Matters podcast. So if you've spent any time on social media over the past year, there's a good chance you've come across a short video of Neal Foard telling a story, maybe about a moment of kindness from a stranger, a quiet insight pulled from everyday life, or even a story about Kurt Vonnegut's coffee cup, which happens to be one of my favorites. Neal's background isn't in education. He's spent decades in advertising, helping brands tell stories that resonate. But in recent years, he's turned his attention to something much more human, helping people reconnect through storytelling, empathy, and what he calls radical kindness. Through his platform Storyfire, Neal has built a following by doing something deceptively simple, telling stories that remind us of what's good in the world and what's possible when we choose to lead with care. These stories start small, an interaction, a memory, an object, but they open into something much larger, something that feels intensely human, almost like a feeling you've needed but long forgotten. I invited Neal onto the podcast not just because I admire his work, but because I think education leaders, both on the district side and EdTech side, need to hear from voices outside the sector, voices that can remind us of the power of narrative, of the quiet dignity in kindness, and of the cultural diet we're feeding ourselves, not just in the curriculum, but in the stories we choose to tell about ourselves and the world. In our conversation, Neal shares insights from his years in advertising, including how great leaders earn trust through fairness, humor, and the kind of stories they tell again and again. He talks about what we can learn from chimpanzees, why kindness isn't weakness, and how school systems can become the sort of places that model courage and not compliance. We also talk about boys and young men, the crisis of online masculinity, and how leadership, real leadership, means showing up with strength and softness at the same time. There are lessons here for anyone trying to create culture, community, and care for the other, especially in turbulent times. This isn't a typical Education Matters episode, but I think it's one that's well worth your while. Without further ado, here's my conversation with storyteller and kindness advocate, Neal Foard. Neal Foard, welcome to the Education Matters podcast.
Hey, thanks, Jason.
Where does this podcast find you today?
Los Angeles.
Los Angeles. Did you grow up in that area?
I was a Bay Area kid. I grew up in Oakland, California, and growing up with a chip on our shoulder about San Francisco.
I'd love to learn about what growing up on the West Coast was like at the time you did, because I think that was a marvelous time to be a young man. This podcast for the audience could be a little bit different. Typically, we have a lot of senior leaders in education, but Neal, I found you and your content online, and I think there's a lot of overlap with public education and things not only educators need to hear and would like to hear, but also students as well. So again, thank you very much for taking some time to join me today.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Before we dive into a lot of things about your life and career and what you're doing now, can you give the audience a sense of when and where did you grow up?
I was, like I say, a Bay Area kid in the late 60s, early 70s. So I was right in the thick of Haight-Ashbury, People's Park, Black Panther Party, Hells Angels. You know, it's a crazy thing, Jason, but the Hells Angels and the Black Panther Party were founded about 3.5 miles from each other. Actually, I shouldn't say the Hells Angels was founded there. The Oakland chapter, of which Sonny Barger was president, was the sort of preeminent Hells Angels. I had the distinction of, I used to work as a paper boy for the Oakland Tribune back in the 70s. And they would take us out in this van every fifth Friday, and we would have to go solicit subscriptions to the paper. And I crashed a Black Panther meeting and a Hells Angels meeting in consecutive months. But anyway, the environment at the time was lively and progressive in the sense that people were exploring new possibilities in a way that was optimistic. But even in that, there was this crazy helter-skelter freak out in the country. People don't recognize now, the context of the way we live now. And everybody is so at each other's throats. Seemingly, it's the worst that it's ever been. But when you go back to 1969, the country was tearing itself apart. Vietnam was raging. Political assassination was a regular thing. They killed John F. Kennedy and Robert Kennedy. They killed Martin Luther King. They shot Malcolm X. There was the Manson family and the Zodiac killer. And, it was crazy times. But in this cauldron, you also had the most astonishing music and an emerging togetherness in the Bay Area that was really mind-blowing. And, when you're a kid, you don't have any context. You have no historical reference. So this is just life to you, this crazy, boiling, melting pot of cultures and energies. And when, back when I was going to school, things like orchestra and art classes and regular PE and so forth, there wasn't this heavy, oppressive, just jam it down your throat to meet a test outcome because the school was going to get tested. It was none of that. It was this very interesting, we were exposed to architecture and art and, I knew about all these architects in in high school. They were teaching us about Gaudi and Frank Lloyd Wright and Usonian houses and so forth. I don't think they're doing that now.
Before we get into some of your schooling, which I'm very interested to learn about, can I take you back to your earliest memory? What's your earliest memory?
My earliest memory was in kindergarten. Until I was 5, we lived in San Diego, and I was part of this school where they would teach kids to read when you were 4 and 5, and the way they would teach us to read is by putting on these little plays. We would make milk carton puppets, and then we would have to read the lines for the play. And everybody was so jacked about being in this little play that it was a way to fuel our fascination with reading. And another thing they would do is, and I lament that this didn't continue when I was in the Bay Area, but they were really aggressive about teaching you Spanish when you were 5, because San Diego was so very, it was heavily Latino influenced, which I've always, because of that experience, I've always felt an affinity to the Spanish language. Like it sounds beautiful to my ear.
Yeah, we as Canadians have that experience with French for sure.
Yeah,
we all appreciate it much later than while going through it. How did you, outside of school with your friends, how did you play as children?
Well, there's this trope that I love so much. It's a kind of a paragraph that is completely typical of my childhood, which was your mom thought you were just riding or your bike around the block for 8 hours, but in fact, in that time you had ridden 10 miles, explored an abandoned house, jumped over some garage roofs, attempted a Ouija board, built a den in the woods, and made your own fire. Like that was rock fights were like a thing. And, we really would jump on our bikes and disappear for, hours and hours. And I remember my friend Teddy Lawson and I going, we lived in Oakland, but we like rode our bikes to Berkeley. And next thing you know, we're on Shattuck Avenue watching a Hare Krishna parade. I mean, it was crazy cool, man.
I didn't get, my dad had all these Hare Krishna references growing up, and I had no idea what they were for years and years, but he was a child of the 60s as well.
I'll give you an indication of like this, an event that you, as I say, when you are 11 years old, you have no context to know how unusual this is. So Teddy Lawson and I have ridden our bikes into Berkeley. We're on Shattuck Avenue. We've stopped temporarily and in front of a barber shop. All of a sudden we hear this like boom, boom. Okay. And then we look down the street and there is a 3-story bamboo and batik structure that is walking down the street being carried by what at the time seemed like 50 Hare Krishnas. And there were like 2 Hare Krishnas at the top of this structure, like waving and throwing flowers at people. And there's a full parade and all these crazy musical instruments are going. And the guys from the barber shop that we were standing in front of come out. There's a guy literally, with that apron that they put on you when you're getting like a shave. And he comes out. I don't know, this guy must have been about 50. Okay, so we're watching this thing go by and he turns to me and he goes, "You don't see that every day." And I'm thinking, I don't know, kind of around here you sort of do. Anyway, but that, Jason, would have been sort of day in the life of an 11-year-old in Berkeley.
What?
In 1971.
In 1971. Yeah. I had a great upbringing, and I say like Toronto in the 80s and 90s was just a magical place. But the one thing my friends and I often, I think maybe romanticize a bit, but are fascinated by was what was growing up in the West Coast in the era slightly preceding us, because all of our culture and film and so many stories came out of that era, and I think it must have been just a fascinating and marvelous place to grow up at that time.
There was an inflection point, Jason, when as I say, we would just get lost in summers, just boogie, and we would be gone for hours and hours, and nobody was looking after us, and it didn't matter because we were having our own adventures. It was very good for mental development and camaraderie and so forth. But I do remember that when Martin Luther King was assassinated, they literally pulled us out of school for fear that somebody would come in and, out of revenge, shoot white kids. Now that was a ludicrous thought. There was no way that was going to happen. My father, when I crashed the Black Panther meeting, and tried to sell them a subscription to the Oakland Tribune, I came home and announced this to my family, and my mother was mortified. My father said, "Relax, Alice. That kid was safer in that building than you could possibly. Do you really seriously think they're going to do anything to that kid? That's not what they're about." And the paranoia that occurred after Martin Luther King was assassinated led to this helicopter parenting, overly supervised, because everybody was scared they were going to get kidnapped and trafficked and so on and so on. Statistically, the likelihood of that is extremely low, but the paranoia resulted in a desperate clampdown of people's freedoms.
It's certainly one of the unfortunate things that I think I've seen stats, like it was more likely to happen back then and everyone had more freedom then. And now it's very unlikely. And, the line from Hate, which I think is generally right, and Lukianov, is that, we underprotect our kids online and overprotect them out in public.
Yeah, I think that's a very good insight.
So can you take me down memory lane just a little further? What was one of the first things you remember loving to learn?
History. Oh my God, I loved history. Still do. To me, history is I think there was something, I had this teacher, Mrs. Golden, who had a way of reminding us that history is not an event on a canvas played by people who do not resemble human beings. History is what's happening this very moment. It's the same players over and over. It's, and you have to put yourself in the shoes of people in 1776 and truly ask yourself, would I really have supported American independence? Because if you go back to that time, only a third of the population was actively in support of independence, and a full third was actively against it. And then the rest of it, just like human beings now, were sort of uncommitted and would blow depending on who was winning at the time. And history to me was this sort of, it was the story of human beings under certain conditions behaving as human beings do. And what can we learn from that?
So obviously storytelling is a big part of what you do now. Is there any kind of family ritual, whether it be dinner chatter or your father or an uncle that told stories around a campfire that trained your ear for story and rhythm and that kind of influenced you, or maybe it was a teacher?
Yeah, I think so, though. For example, my grandfather, who didn't like me very much, he used to have a way, he could just describe eating corn on the cob. And there was something about it that had flavor and barbecue sauce on it. I mean, he had a knack. He was in marketing, and I didn't know that. I was, it's funny, Jason. I was working in advertising for a long time, and I went to work as a creative director at Foot Cone and Belding in LA. Foot Cone and Belding was a great advertising agency, of whom the name Belding comes from Don Belding, who my grandfather used to work with regularly on the Van de Kamp's food account. I'm working at FCB at Foot Cone and Belding for years. And then my mother eventually announces to me, your grandfather knew Don Belding. I'm like, I could have taken advantage of this, Mom, years ago if you had just informed me. But anyway, sorry. What was your question? Because
it's interesting. What kind of family rituals? So it seems.
Oh, yeah. Thank you. Sorry. Yeah. Okay. Well, so I do remember this, Jason, is that my sister Lily used to fascinate the dinner table. I have 3 sisters, Mary, Lily, and Trish, each of which is a genius in their own way. But I was the baby of the family. And when Lily would get going and tell some story, boy, my dad thought that was great. And I think it was the fact that my father admired it so much that made me want to be good at it. And so what would happen is that before VCRs, Saturday Night Live used to, if you wanted to watch Saturday Night Live, you had to stay up. And I mean, it would go from 11:30 to 1 o'clock. And so you had to stay up for the whole thing. Well, nobody in my household was willing to stay up for the whole thing. So I would watch the show on Saturday night, and then at breakfast the following morning, I would redo the show for everybody. And, I had a much more prodigious memory back then. And the nicest compliment I ever got was that my sister Lily, there was some skit that I just loved. And when I replayed it, years later, my sister Lily saw it again and she said, "Oh, your version was better." And I thought, woohoo, right on. Anyway, so that was a ritual, is that I used to replay Saturday Night Live on Sunday morning for the family members that wouldn't stay up.
Oh, that's great. So then when you were in high school and, maybe beyond that, what did you study that kind of most impacted you, even how you think today and what you ended up doing for your career? Like, did you go into drama? Did you go right into marketing and advertising? What was that journey like for you?
I participated a little bit in drama in high school, but I didn't really get into it. I wanted to be in a band. So we started a punk band. And oh my God, that was the best. Jason, when you do the count off and then all of a sudden the music erupts and it's like legit. It's like, oh my God, this is real legit music. The sensation that comes over you is never to be equaled. It's like catching air on a snowboard. You can barely believe it's happening. And that for me was, that's when I got a bug for performing, was being in a band and just thinking, is there anything better than this? And in college, I got advice. I was not very good with girls. And, I was sort of strangely shy. And so what happened was somebody's uncle said to me, look, do yourself a favor, write a play. If you write a play and put it on, it will attract women in a way that you won't believe. Like it will be a supernatural phenomenon, mark my words. And he was not wrong. And so I wound up writing 2 plays in college and staging them. And that was a revelation as well. There, if you go back into certain cultures where they would have like oral traditions, they wouldn't necessarily write down their histories, but it would get passed on. Or if you look at the skaldic tradition among the Vikings, they would pay enormous amounts of money to have a skaldic poet, after some triumph, sing the praises of some leader. The leader would pay them astonishing amounts in order to be written into history. So, and the poets, because of this money and because of how much everybody admired this skill, they would be able to create this rhyme about how great everybody is. Look at how similar it is to today. Like an Eminem. Essentially, that's what he does. Like a Coolio or a Heavy D, or the really great ones like the, there's Dr. Dre or Snoop. What they're doing, that's a bad example. Cool Mo D or Public Enemy. It's the same thing. They would write these rhymes to tell the story of their times. And it is so admired. It's strange how people admire that kind of virtuosity. It's this, it's on a par with sports achievements, with military, heroics. And, when I did these plays, I thought, wow, you feel it in your water. You go, oh, this is something. This really gets admired. And what happened was that it becomes something you lean into. But I didn't have the skill to go into show business. I wasn't that good. That was the thing about advertising. It was sort of showbiz light, And what that led to for me was I wasn't necessarily the most creative person in, the creative departments. And I never was. But what I could do is I could explain the ideas with showmanship. And that turned out to be a fantastic tool for persuading clients to accept creative ideas or to hire us as an agency. The role of showbiz, the role of putting on a show. All right, let me return to something that I think is maybe more on theme for you, which is this. There's this quote. It's attributed to Einstein. I don't know if it really is him, but the quote is, students are not vessels to be filled. They are torches to be lit. And that is true of everybody, not just students. If a client is going to invest money on the promise that this advertisement is going to do what you say it's going to do, they have to get excited about it on an emotional level. It isn't enough to intellectually be persuaded that it's going to do what you say, because every marketing dollar is a risk. And the more people try to depend on data in order to make their marketing decisions, the worse the advertising gets. There was a golden era of advertising, and it lasted from about 1965 to about 1995. And after that, Facebook and Google and the analytics came in, and just robbed the industry of any money, any fat, and just to create a kind of metaphor. When somebody really has no body fat on them, like none, it's creepy AF. And, there is a certain attractiveness that comes from a little bit of extra padding in the right places. Mm-hmm. And, youth is filled with that padding, and advertising was like that. You've got to have a layer of fat on it, a little bit. In both the production of things, there has to be a little waste. And in what shows up on the screen or on the radio or in the print ad, there has to be a little waste in order for it to be attractive to people. And storytelling is like that. You can't simply relate events. It has to come with color and vividness and extra words in the right places. So,
well, a couple of things there. I mean, the quote is one of my favorite, and I think it originates with William Butler Yeats, the poet.
That makes more sense.
And it's a magnificent one. I'm sure Einstein would have known it. But also, I'm very fascinated by advertising, particularly in that era. And then I want to come back to like sort of how you've navigated that space, because as you know, I'm a big student of Marshall McLuhan, and he was the first to study advertising as an art form. The academics turned up their nose at advertising, but he looked at it, with maybe a more ancient lens of looking at it as forms of rhetoric and persuasion.
Yeah, it's Socratic. Advertising exactly. It's an art form and a science, like most things. And
so how did you find your way into it? I mean, you had the family background, but it sounds like you weren't really aware of that. And it's kind of interesting too. Yeah.
I wanted to be an architect like my dad, and he discouraged the hell out of that. He was like, you won't make money. Do yourself a favor, be a stockbroker. Just remember the words of the great bank robbers. They say, why do you rob banks? Because that's where the money is. So my father wanted me desperately to become a stockbroker. And so he leaned on me hard to get a business education. So I went to a small college near Stanford called Menlo College School of Business Administration. And I got my BS in business.
So can you give me, a bit of the background as to how you got into advertising and what that world was like?
When I left college, I sort of was a little bit rudderless, and I wound up going to work in a lumber yard for like 3 years. And, there was a time when I thought that was like I'd really handicapped myself and I hadn't gotten into the industry that I really wanted to be in. But it was instructive because it taught me humility, and it gave me a sort of frame of reference that not everybody is like you. And don't be such a big shot. Don't think you're any smarter than anybody else. And I think we can all benefit from a little comeuppance in the world, a little bit, where you're not a big shot, and all of your privileges kind of don't amount to anything here. And anyway, I was very unhappy in that work, and I started asking friends like, "Hey, do you know where I'm looking for another job? You got any ideas?" And the first thing that came up was my brother-in-law's brother was leaving an ad agency job in Los Angeles. And before they posted the job, I swooped in on his recommendation and got his old role. So it was kind of accidental. And then I was just looking for something else to do besides lumber. And a lot of people came to advertising that way. You'll see it again and again where it was sort of accidental. They sort of stumbled into it. As I said, it was sort of show business light. And so people kind of, when openings would happen, people would go, "Oh, yeah, maybe that sounds cool," and you'll see it over and over in the industry. For some reason, it was kind of the accidental tourist. Then, for a couple or 3 years, I wound up being an account service rep as opposed to the creative end of things, and I was client service. And again, it was the sort of thing where I wasn't particularly good at it. But nevertheless, I was, energetic enough to try to overcompensate with effort. And eventually I found myself going into the creative end of things, just on, just vibrating energy, meaning that I was just so willing to come in at 6 a.m. and leave at 11 at night. I could sort of grind my way to ideas, like brute forcing a password. That was the way that I got anywhere.
What were some of your biggest mistakes that you think folks listening to the audience can learn from?
Well, I'm not 100% sure that I can interpret them now as mistakes, because the people that we are is a result of the experiences that we've had. And often unpleasant experiences teach you lessons more vividly and more eternally than good experiences. But looking back, the things that at the time I wish I could have done better, which would have been to be a lot more deliberate about where I was headed, to seek out mentors more, and in particular, in Canada and the United States, I think that the century belongs to entrepreneurs. I don't mean in the sense that starting your own company, but rather controlling your own destiny. That is not depending on somebody else to cut you breaks, but rather seeking them out on your own. And initiative is the thing that gets the most reward in the United States. If you are willing to try, willing to ask that person out on a date, willing to ask for a raise, willing to ask for a job, willing to make a proposal in your company that isn't necessarily in your area of expertise. The world belongs to people who seize the initiative. And that was something that, in particular, I wish I'd exercised in this sense. When you meet people at work who skill you admire, and you think, oh, they're going places, then grab hold of them and see if there's something you can do together. Because the great advertising agencies were partnerships. It wasn't just some single individual. It was a critical mass of 2 or 3 people whose skills were complementary. And I wish I'd been a little more deliberate about that. About, teaming up with people who I admired.
Did working the advertising industry on the creative side in particular teach you anything about human nature?
Well, my father would say that you'll never lose money appealing to people's vanity. And the old Dale Carnegie quote is that everybody's favorite subject is themselves. And if you really dig into the psychology of why people buy things, it's kind of disappointed. It's kind of disappointing in the sense that people are just acting out of loneliness and fear about 90% of the time. And when you go onto social media and you see everybody showing you these fantastic pictures of their vacations and bragging about their cars or just bragging about themselves, it's done out of insecurity. They don't think of themselves as enough. So they're trying to push this false front in front of everybody, thinking this will earn love and respect. Not my real self, but this artificial construct in this house that I've rented in order to do videos in it to show you what a big shot I am. And this, do you know what I mean? It's the thing that you discover in the psychology of what appeals to people is how often they're acting out of fear and insecurity. And it's a shame that advertisers many times will capitalize on that.
So did you find it easy to, in a sense, manipulate people's behavior to buy?
Well, I never wanted to do that. What I wanted to do was early on, I was just trying to be a friend. Like all I ever wanted to do in television commercials was write a love letter to the people that were the customers and say, you're not in this alone. And, there's a life, there's a successful life in being good to each other. I will say the one lesson that I walked away with, Jason, the distilled learning of 30 years is nothing more than this. Life gets so much easier when people like you. And the best way to make people like you is to like them first. The story I frequently tell is I was in a restaurant. by myself, and I overheard these two women talking. And this one woman was talking about her ex-husband, and she was describing him as a dog. And then she was making the pronouncement that all men are dogs. And the problem was she didn't mean it as a compliment. And I thought to myself, if I was a dog, I would hire a lawyer and sue her for slander, because dogs are awesome. And to say that if a man is like a dog, it makes him bad, well, that's no good. Now, we all know, if we have dogs, if you have a dog, it's not all sweetness and light. I mean, they have a lot of drawbacks, objectively. For example, they shed on everything. You have to constantly walk them. You have to pick up their poop, and you have to, when they're young, they bite into everything and they pee everywhere, and they cost a fortune at the vet, and God help you if they bite someone. And then after you pour all this energy and this sacrifice into them, after years and years and years, they die. And there is an excellent chance that that is going to be among the saddest days of your life. So my question to most people is, why do people bother? Why do people love dogs so much? And the answer is because dogs love you first. They don't judge you. My favorite thing about them is they don't look at you and wonder if they could have done better. And so the lesson from that is that in order for a brand or a person to be liked, be the first mover. Be the one who, like a dog, doesn't wait for permission to love you. And again, to return to Dale Carnegie, who kind of had it all figured out in 1920, the sweetest music in people's ears is their own name. And when you are at a party and you take a legitimate interest in someone, and when they tell you some story, instead of jumping in with your own story, you ask them questions to keep them going, they really like that. There's a Maya Angelou quote: people won't remember what you said. They probably won't remember what you did, but they'll always remember how you made them feel. And an advertiser that writes love letters to their customers is just going to earn that preferred status of irrational loyalty, loyalty beyond reason.
Well, this is a nice segue into the work you're currently doing, which really struck me, is, really centered around kindness and storytelling. And I just found it to be an absolutely powerful combination. Can you talk about how you started doing the videos you're doing and putting that kindness out there in the world?
The origin of the emphasis on kindness is that it doesn't take a genius to look at our current media landscape and say to yourself, oh my God, we are being soaked in negativity, divisiveness, and fear-mongering. The rage baiting is how they keep you engaged. And in this environment, I do not want to contribute that. I want to be the antidote to that, because people are for the most part, most people are far better than they are being portrayed. And if you believe in the Pygmalion effect, which is when you set a high expectation for people, they usually live up to it. And the opposite is also true, the Golem effect. When you have low expectations for people, they will live down to those. Well, if I put into the world positive messages about how most people are actually pretty cool and pretty nice, and you give them inspiration and you try to encourage kindness, and that like the lesson I often teach is the return on investment on kindness is so disproportionately high. Even if you were a psychopath, it's still more profitable to be nice to people than it is to bully them and victimize them. Again and again, you'll see anecdotally and in statistics and in finance, the best, most successful companies are the ones that love their customers and are kind to them.
So, that's part of the secret behind what you're doing. But let me give you an example, or give an example for the audience, right? Like your short video, A Postcard from 1969, I think has had millions of views, certainly.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Is certainly in my mind a viral video. What's your secret for turning that very simple memory into a viral story?
Well, I didn't set out to make it a viral story. To be frank, the origin of that was my children never knew my dad. He died before they were born. And it was kind of sad to me because I think he would have loved them. And I think that what would have amused him was how much like him they are. And so what I was doing was I was sort of trying to give a gift to my children of a memory of my own father so that they would kind of know who he was. And what's more, I was also, the subtext was, if I should never meet my own grandchildren, this video will give them a sense about who their parents' dad was. And so when I did this story, it was really just literally a memory of my dad and I breaking down in the California Central Valley in the middle of summer, and how what started out as, oh my God, this is going to be absolutely awful, turned out to be the event that restored my father's faith in humanity. And so it was a very personal story with no intention that it should do anything except give my children a sense of who their dad was. I think the reason it took off was there's a strange paradox, and the more personal something is, the more universal it is. My story is so similar to many people's that they were passing it on to their friends out of a sense of nostalgia. And what's more, it told a story of a time of great division in the country, of enormous division. And it said, even in that environment, people were good to each other in a way that was restorative. And so it's funny that armed with that, I say to myself, you know what? I am just going to tell these stories from personal experience that sort of are restorative and reassuring that people aren't as bad as you're being told.
Yeah, well, I found it very moving, as many of your videos. And another aspect in them that I absolutely love is that you often highlight like an anonymous cashier, tow truck driver, a coffee shop owner, mixed with Kurt Vonnegut, which is one of my favorites because he's one of my favorite authors of all time. And that story was just so beautiful. Do you have a story by any chance, not to put you on the spot, but about an unsung educator or someone in the education realm that impacted you that kind of deserves that spotlight?
Well, my old boss, Scott Gilbert, who was my boss in advertising, who I just loved like a father. He was at one time, he was a teacher, and you could feel it. You could feel it in the way that he managed people. And I remember one time we were talking about ambition, and I said, well, Scott, you've got a very kind of special version of that. I can sense that you're ambitious, but I never get the sense that it's out of your own self-aggrandizement. And he confessed to me that the only reason he was ambitious was to keep other bosses away from his people. In other words, I will grind to make sure that I get promoted so that you never have that jerk as a boss. And I thought, what a great orientation. When you're doing it for other people, it's kind of funny, but some people will expend enormous energy for themselves, and other people, like you'll find this in conscientious objectors or medics on the battlefield, they will risk their own life to save others under conditions where they would never stick their neck out for themselves. And Scott was like that. And to give you a sort of a sense about who he was, this was the story that I tell about Scott, is that when I was working for him, I had no money. I mean, I was driving this car with no hood on it, and I had 2 suits, but they weren't even suits. They were just like, hand-me-down pants and stuff. And he pulls me aside. I was working for somebody else. And Scott pulled me aside and said, brother, you look terrible. I could see the stains on your tie. This is where you used to wear ties in the office. He goes, there's stains on your ties. He goes, listen, go out to Nordstrom and buy 3 suits. All right. And what we're going to do is, on the down low, you're going to expense them as meals and I will approve them. All right. you look terrible. You're making the agency look bad. So go get these suits and we'll work it out on how to pay for them. Okay. So I go to Nordstrom. I get these fantastic suits. I got one that was double-breasted Glen plaid. I looked like something Ralph Lauren would have designed. And I started wearing these things around. And what happens is when you wear these suits, you really did feel more confident and better about yourself. And I met my wife when I was wearing one of these suits, and that gave me the actual confidence to talk to her. And but like I say, he wasn't even my boss, and he was doing this for me. Well, years later, I found out he didn't expense them as meals. He just paid for them out of his pocket. And I thought, what a guy. And then years later, after I had worked for him for years, I left to go to work for another agency, and he was very supportive of that. And, I worked for him a few times because I kept coming back to go to work for him again because no boss was ever that good. And when I went to the new job, he had partisans in that office. He had guys who had worked for him. And when I came in on my first day and I go into my office, on my desk, there are 3 framed pictures of him that these other guys had left on my desk. And I thought, that just tells the tale, right? That his loyalists are everywhere. It's like a secret Vatican. Oh, they're Jesuits too. I don't mean that he was Catholic. I mean that we just had a network of old Scott proteges. It's fantastic. God, he was good.
So, I mean, it seems that, you've also had like kindness and good leadership modeled for you. And I know you've spoken often about how it, kindness in the business world in particular, can change the whole system. In your work that you're doing now, because I think it'd be really relevant for the district leaders that listen and the EdTech leaders that listen to this podcast to get a sense of, how would you coach them to make like kindness actually operational and just not ornamental in an organization?
Well, I want to start by saying that kindness doesn't necessarily mean that you're treating everybody with kid gloves. It's not that. For example, Scott was very blunt about things that I needed to improve on. It's just that you always knew they came from love. Like the only reason he's telling me this is so that I won't repeat that mistake. He's the guy that points out that you've got a chive in your teeth, right? Because he doesn't want you being embarrassed by walking around with it. So it is often a kindness to point out things that you're doing wrong, but just not do it from a bullying or a fury, but rather in order to help. And this orientation of kindness is being helpful. Kindness is guiding people to help them achieve what they're after. It's giving somebody the benefit of a little tough love. But then also it isn't, I think in the spirit of your question, the way that you can take action on it is by going out into the world, making a commitment every day to do a gesture where somebody knows you care about them. So I love to keep a pocket full of little things like this. Okay. Like I love these little these little toys. And what I'll do is if I'm in a Starbucks or I'm in a restaurant and somebody's getting heat from a customer, I love to break them out of the mental upset by giving them a toy and explaining like why I'm giving it to them. Like you earned this by having to suffer through that swamp donkey. And as long as people know that there are good humans out there, they can tolerate the bad ones. But the problem is we can't be passive when somebody's getting a hard time or struggling. We can't be passive and just let it happen. We have to realize we're all in it together.
So Neal, we've talked a bit about how you've implemented this notion of kindness mixed with your storytelling. Is there advice or some guidance you can give to, senior leaders that operate districts with thousands of employees and teachers and students and how they can bring that to bear in their work in education.
Yeah, the lesson that is most distilled, the sort of essence of a good advertiser, the way they communicate, the way they tell stories in the world, is they operate off the principle of life gets so much easier when people like you. And the way that you generate that is by the choice of the type of story you tell. Many times when people are trained how to be good public speakers, they'll spend a lot of time focusing on what to do with your hands or how to maintain eye contact and all of that superficial, behavioral stuff that is supposed to project a sense of power and, this is your power pose and this is how you look like you know what you're doing. But in fact, I believe that it's your choice of topic that you choose to tell stories about that really broadcasts to the audience what moves you, what's important to you, how you're trying to help the rest of us monkeys. And the reason I use that term, the rest of us monkeys, is that chimpanzees they live in hierarchical troops, and they're usually led by a physically dominant male. But if that male is perceived as bullying or not sufficiently concerned with the welfare of the weaker members of the troop, or too selfish and accumulating wealth for themselves at the expense of the rest, chimpanzees have a very finely tuned radar for fairness. And chimpanzees are ferociously strong. And they'll gang up on the leader and they will rip him, literally, they will rip him limb from limb, first chewing off his face and genitals. And human beings are close cousins to this violent inclination. And they also, human beings, have a finely tuned radar for fairness. And the best leaders in chimpanzee troops, the ones that last, are the ones that are fair and generous and concerned about the welfare of others. And the same is true of human beings. The best leaders are concerned for the welfare of others. They lift up their charges by the choice of the stories they choose to tell to suggest these are the values we live by. This is the lesson I'd like for us all to think about today. In a way, a leader is a little bit like a pastor or a priest or a rabbi. They communicate the way we behave around here and our attitudes towards others. And we do so for the purpose of having a long-term going concern. We're not just focused on the next quarter. We're a business that will leave a legacy and that operates ethically. And I'll give you a sense, for example, of the type of story that determines how people view you. So I was in a tire store. I'd gotten 2 flats. You may have even heard me tell this story, Jason. I'd gotten 2 flats, and yet I had gotten them within 500 feet of a tire store. So I was kind of having mixed emotions, on the one hand, but on the other hand, so I'm in this waiting room getting 2 new shoes put on my car. And I am sitting in between 2 women who you couldn't have told the difference from them, between them in a police lineup. They've got basically the same haircut, essentially the same wardrobe. They're pretty much the same age, same ethnicity, right? So they look like they came out of the same factory on the same line. The one woman on my left is complaining loudly into her cell phone about a bad experience that she had at a restaurant where the waiter had gotten her order wrong twice, and she was pretty sure that the second time it was on purpose. So she tried to get the waiter fired, and the manager wasn't having it. And so now she was going to leave a scathing Yelp review, and she was contemplating maybe even putting up signs on telephone poles near the restaurant to discourage people from going there. Okay. Then she hangs up in a huff. Not 15 seconds later, the woman on the other side of me says, I had a great experience in a restaurant today. I was having coffee and I was looking out the window, and there was this very cute girl with a big dog walking down the street. And she sees this older gentleman waiting to use the crosswalk, but it's a very big boulevard and he's quite reticent about crossing the street because I think he's scared he's not going to make it. So she takes him by the hand, and when the green signal comes up, the 2 of them walk hand in hand across the street while the big dog patrols in front of the cars to make sure nobody gets any fancy ideas. And then they get to the other side, and I can't hear what they're saying, but they're having some kind of conversation. And after this conversation, they just kept walking hand in hand down the street. Isn't that lovely? And I thought, yes, it is. Now, my question to you, Jason, is who would you rather spend the day with? It's their choice of what they choose to talk about that tells you everything about who they are. One is farting her grievances into my life, and the other is encouraging me that Gen Z with a big dog is still going to look out for the older generations. I feel better for having heard that story. Now, for your crew, a leader in an educational context who tells stories that are uplifting about positive things that people have done, that reassure everybody that we're all not just being victimized and we're not suckers for being nice to each other. What they communicate is the standards we set for each other around here are that human beings will live up to the expectations you set for them. So let me set some expectations for people. There's still good in the world if you have eyes to see it. And there are still good kids. And yes, I do know that you're going to take a lot of crap from a lot of nasty little rabbits. But there are still those jewels out there, those children who need support. And just remember, folks, everybody is walking around afraid and lonely, and they think they're the only one going through this adventure, not sure of themselves. And you've got to give them the reassurance that they're not alone in this journey, that we're in this together.
Yeah, and I think that message is powerful in education when there's just so much negative perspectives, even, within the education system itself. And it's part of the reason I launched this podcast is to expose these really great stories. So I think that's wonderful advice for them and wonderful guidance.
Let me make one more comment when it comes to, I think that in every single school, we should be teaching that what you take in on the internet is a diet, that what you consume from media is a diet. And you cannot take into your mind these nasty, high calorie, low nutrition messages that try to drive us apart. If you consume enough negativity, you become negative. And just like you watch out for what you eat in food because it's either good or bad for your body, the same is true about what you consume online. And we should be teaching that very early, that you want a healthy mind, you want to grow, you want to be a good person, you want to be successful. Take in messages and people that are not trying to convince you that everybody's out to get you. And that the only way to success is by stepping on others, because that's not true. So, that'll earn you a bullet on certain city streets if you are not sufficiently concerned about the welfare of the people that pay you money.
Well, I think that's a wonderful message, and it kind of prompts another question I have for you. You strike me as a really great role model, in particularly for young men who are, I think, devoid of really great male role models in this day and age, given what you just mentioned online and what gets clicks and what the idea of masculinity is, and having a Corvette or a Porsche and lots of money and women and that kind of stuff. Do you have some advice that you would give for, students in high school or even, men in their early to mid 20s?
Well, you and I are both fans of Scott Galloway, and Galloway does a really, really brilliant job of characterizing what he considers a man. And one of the three principal things that he considers manhood, one is a provider, but another is a protector. And that always struck me as, I remember this kid in grammar school. He was very small, but if he ever saw a bully going after somebody, even as small as he was, he would throw himself into it. Like a dachshund, weirdly, very small dog, right? But the name dachshund means badger hound. They also call them Dachskrieger, which means badger warrior. A dachshund will go into a badger's lair and drag them out. Like, that was this kid. He was a Dachskrieger, and I always admired him as, wow, if he sees a bully picking on somebody else, he doesn't think about his safety for a second. He just sees red. And to me, a man who sees somebody else picking on a woman or victimizing somebody who's weaker than they are, a real man steps in. And a real man won't tolerate that from his friends because he's trying to, Pygmalion effect, he's trying to bring the best out of his friends. So he signals that that's not good behavior. I consider kindness is looking out for other people and being fair. And a real man demonstrates that they're a good provider, they are kind, and they are a protector. And I wish I weren't just stealing those from Scott Galloway, but let's face it, those are good. And look, there are days when I am consumed by fury. One of them, as you've heard from me today, like my Wi-Fi provider, is they don't even know it, but if they were within arm's reach right now, they might earn a punch in the face. But my daughter sets the example for me. My daughter, who's in her 20s, does not put up with that behavior from me. And I know she loves me, but she calls me out on that behavior. And she'll say, this is very off-brand for you, Dad. You know, this is not you being your best self. It helps to have a loved one keep your feet on the ground. And so I think young men should be honest with each other. And then my last thing is, women are not out to get you. You're being told they are. You're being shown you're being shown the worst examples of how it does happen. And as if this is everywhere. Women are not out to get you. Women are just as scared and lonely as you are. We're teammates. We're teammates here. And anybody that tells you that women are out to get you is choosing the wrong examples of women. And they're trying to clickbait you. They're trying to rage bait you into being your worst self. And if anybody that tells you you don't need women, or that women don't need men, or that, you know, couples, whether it's gay, straight, whatever it is, that people don't need each other, that's just plain not supported by history. That's not supported by the facts. People crave togetherness and community and belonging. One of my favorite shows that I find on YouTube, reruns of this thing called First Dates. There's a restaurant in the UK where all they would do is they cameraed this restaurant up. They had cameras everywhere. And they showed people on first dates. They picked somebody to go on a first date with somebody. It's glorious to watch people try to find a companion. Sometimes it works out. Sometimes it's pretty good. Sometimes it doesn't. It's entertaining either way, but the ones that really just kill me, I mean, in a good way, are the ones where you can see two people suddenly realize, oh my God, this could be a good person. It's glorious to watch people make a connection. And I think the reason it's glorious for me is because I'm watching somebody and I'm having an empathetic reaction going, oh, that way, if that was me, I'd be all over that. Do you know what I mean? And that's how most of us are. A young man who just can acknowledge not everybody's out to get you, that there really are good women out there. I venture to say most of them are good. It's just that, unfortunately, we're lonely and we're frightened, and we think we're the only ones that are insecure. And because of that, we don't think we're good enough to reach out to somebody and try. And I confess that's how I was in my 20s. I was terrible. Man, it would take me so long to screw up the nerve to ask somebody on a date. I mean, the number of missed opportunities. Yeah,
well, I mean, I kind of love how even when you talk about, you know, masculinity and protection, still at the core of it is kindness. And I think that's the message that really needs to get out. So my penultimate question, and one that I'm really interested in your perspective, because I typically ask this to education administrators, but I'd love to know your perspective from the outside, is If you had a magic wand and could do anything to reform the education system, what would you do?
Well, I can't speak for how Canada's system is, but in the United States, I would try to return to a varied curriculum that is something that accommodates things like orchestras and jazz bands and art classes and drama and rhetoric, and because this rigidity on reading, writing, arithmetic, and STEM, and the idea that all this is it is a test factory. Kids game this system. Human beings game any system. You give them the rules, they'll play by the rules. They won't observe the spirit of the law. They'll only observe the law. And what they've discovered is that the Nobel Prize winners are not the same as regular scientists. You are 22 times more likely to win a Nobel Prize if you perform on stage, if you act in plays, if you write plays, write books, write articles, that are fiction or poetry, you're something like 15 times more likely to win a Nobel Prize. And so on, and so on. All of these things like dancing and, sports and so forth, all of these things that don't seem to be important to the advancement of science turn out to be radically important for training the human brain to be innovative and to see new ways of doing things. And in our political climate, where it doesn't matter what works, it only matters what you can persuade some bumpkin, the problem is that we have lost I don't know why we don't just go, who's got a good education system? The Finns? Just do what they do. Why are we wasting our time trying to cobble together something that's politically expedient when the systems that work are already there? Mm-hmm. You can buy them off the shelf, but that's not where we live now. So
yeah. The Finns for sure. Canada's system is quite strong, yet we still struggle to have orchestras and bands in every elementary school, which is where I think it should be. And I think that's just a societal prioritization of things and funding for things like the arts. But amen, brother. I couldn't agree more. So Neal, my last question is always, what book, podcast, movie, music album, or all the above would you recommend to the audience? I'm a particular fan of the book The Brothers Karamazov by Dostoevsky. You and I were meant to be friends. We're meant to be friends. That's what I say is my favorite novel.
Oh, no kidding.
And Crime and Crime and Punishment. Yeah. Very close.
Yeah, both brilliant. I'll tell you why I love Brothers so much, and that is that I think it was written in 1880, and the human comedy on display is very instructive. In other words, all of the same mistakes, the mistakes we make, they've been making those forever. And the older man who thinks he's attractive to a younger woman, the guy who's having a crisis of conscience about whether God exists, these things are so old that when you read it and you find yourself laughing out loud at something written by a Russian in 1880, you realize the universality of the human experience. You finally go, oh, you know what? I'm not the first one to experience this. And I find that deeply consoling that I'm not the first idiot to do this badly. And in that sense, I love it because it's an old book. Then when it comes to podcasts, I do find that Sam Harris's podcast, Waking Up, I think it's called. I can't remember.
Waking Up, another one I never miss.
I find what I love about it is Sam Harris has a vocabulary that usually sends me to the dictionary twice a show, which is to my benefit. Yeah. He's also very thoughtful and reasoned, and Sam Harris strikes me as somebody who will occasionally change his opinion about something. He's that reflective. Or or you know what I'm talking about, where you're willing to change an opinion. You're going to be deliberate about trying to make sure that you heat test your beliefs. I've got a friend, Peter, who does that. He'll choose 5 things a year that he feels strongly about, and then he will deliberately try to pick them apart. And he'll say, yeah, usually once a year, or he'll change his opinion about something. And so getting back to influences and so forth, I find that here's a kind of a tip. When I'm writing, and I'm writing, I'm writing a book, an audio book. It's called Rancho Mad Hammer, and I'm trying to keep up a cadence of doing a chapter every month, and what I find is that I can open like 6 tabs on YouTube, and on one tab I'll have the drone of a B-17. In the next one, I'll have a storm sounds. In the next one, I'll have, Gregorian chants going. And I build this soundscape of white noise, and it will take you under, baby. Like, you will only focus on the words on the page. It's amazing for drowning out the rest of. So I know that's not really an inspiration, but that's just a kind of life hack that I get a kick out of.
Life hack. Well, Hemingway said, for what this is worth for you, Hemingway said, write 750 words a day no matter what. And then he followed that up by saying you can write drunk, but always edit sober. I found that interesting.
Yeah. The Greeks, there was a time when the Greeks used to say that they would negotiate and write legislation bombed out of their minds, and then do the same thing. Then they would edit it and say, if it still made sense, they knew they were onto something, because their belief was that only by being drunk have we let go of the posturing and the BS. Although some people mean drunks, so.
Well, yeah, then there's that, and then tapping into that Dionysian side of life, and who knows? Maybe it's a good recommendation. It's a good recommendation for our politicians today. I bet they'd have more progress. Neal Foard, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
This podcast is recorded on the territory and Treaty 13 lands of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, and on the traditional territory of the Huron-Wendat and the Haudenosaunee. The show is edited and produced by the marvelous and talented Andrew Mastroianni. If you like what you're hearing, make sure you subscribe to us on Spotify or wherever you listen to your podcast. Until next time, remember, there's absolutely no inevitability as long as there's a willingness to contemplate what's happening. I'm your host, Jason Bucheri. Until next time.